education and culture and various other things. Okay. Thank you so much for coming over. We really, really appreciate it. I know a lot of people have been looking forward to it.
Okay. Hi everybody. I'm glad the Manchester weather is it's putting the change in climate change, right? And I sort of feel like I should stand out in the rain out of solidarity. So thanks for having me. Thanks for coming out here. There is no more important place to be. There's no more important thing to do. Yeah? I have to keep the microphone dry. I have solidarity with you, but the microphone needs to stay dry. All right. So I wanted to say a couple of things. Wow, it is putting it down. It's been like this all day. Just now. Sorry. I'm sorry about this. I really feel bad for being out here in the dry. Okay. So first, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for being here. I wanted to spare a thought for Hong Kong, where protests have turned, where the repression against protesters has turned extremely violent. And this is something that we need to constantly keep with us, that our capacity to defend ourselves and each other and planetary systems is only as good as our democratic function and our ability to express ourselves and our ability to communicate and to organize. And when that gets taken away, everything else can be expected to fall too. So I think, anyway, just wanted to say that. It's probably pretty obvious. Okay, I wanted to say a couple of things. I organized around the letter C, but then it didn't quite fit. So we'll just get started and hopefully have discussion afterwards. You might have to come on stage to participate in keeping the microphone dry. In fact, maybe you all want to come on stage to be part of keeping the microphone dry. So I wanted to say a few things. First of all, I'm a physicist by training. I'm currently a professor in ecological economics at the University of Leeds. I am a lead author of the upcoming IPCC report. I do not speak on behalf of the IPCC. Nothing that I say here today reflects in any way on anything that is in the IPCC report or an IPCC pronouncement. That's really important, okay? The IPCC reports speak for themselves. I do not speak for the IPCC. Okay. That clarification in mind, what I wanted to do is just talk to you a bit about what this situation that we're in is means in historical terms and prehistorical terms, and how we can try to get out of it. So, which are doing really, really well. So the first thing is that this year we currently passed 415 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now that's just a number. Is it high? Maybe. Actually, it's really high. What does it mean in terms of historical precedent? Well, the last time that we know of that the atmosphere passed 415 parts per million in the atmosphere of CO2 is 2.5 million years ago. So this is unprecedented in our history. It's not just unprecedented in our history, it's unprecedented in the existence of our species. Homo genus is only 2 million years old. So 415 parts per million being 2.5 million years ago is older than us by quite a bit. That's one thing. The other thing I should say, by the way, is that currently the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is at 408 parts per million. It goes up and down during the year as part of natural variation. So basically the planet breathes in and out because there's more landmass in the north and less landmass in the south. So during the summer, all the plants in the northern landmass sort of breathe the CO2 in, and then they exhale it during the winter when they lose their leaves and the leaves decompose in the ground. And so the important thing to note here is that last year at the same time, we weren't at 408 parts per million, we were at 406. So we're talking about an increase of 2 parts per million per year, which is double what it was a couple of decades ago. A couple of decades ago, the rate of CO2 increase in the atmosphere was going up. It was really bad. But it was going up much slower. So what we have to understand is that we're in a case of completely unprecedented atmospheric change and completely unprecedented rate of change that's accelerating in the wrong direction. The last time that the climate changed so fast, in terms of the rate of change, we can't go back millions of years. We have to go back hundreds of millions of years. Each of those cases was accompanied accompanied by a mass extinction. And we are indeed in the middle of a mass extinction right now, which is why you are calling yourselves, whoa, that was me, that was not the microphone. Extinction Rebellion, right? So the point is to protect the planet against extinction means to protect us and the world against such a high rate of change. So the rate of change right now is something that absolutely needs to be slowed down by any means possible. A third point I wanted to make is that if we continue on our current pace, so right now the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is 415 parts per million, that's really high. If we keep on our current rate of change, we'll have reached a climate that corresponds to a climate of 3 million years ago in just 10 years. Now again, this will be a climate that humans have never experienced, a climate from before Homo genus was around. Can we survive it? Probably yes, some of us. But it's just to say that the rate of change that we're affecting, 3 million years in a decade or a couple of decades, is just that's completely hair-raising and dangerous. Now, I wanted to say a few more words about how we can change this. So what do we do if you see something happening like this? If you're from the perspective of a scientist, if you see something this bad happening, what do you do about it? You try to think about how to change it, how to stop it. And the first thing you think about is technology, because we're in an age where we like to think that science is allied with technology and we have technological fixes. So maybe we even have a technological fix for the planet. Maybe we could just go straight into the planet and intervene in planetary systems and try to avert the worst of this. So that would be what you would call geoengineering, right? So that's one way that you could think of trying to deal with this. It's just like, oh, the planet, we're doing stuff to the planet, that's bad. Well, let's just go intervene in planetary processes themselves. That's sort of the extreme, like, direct-to-technology choice. Another thing you could do, another thing you could do is you could think about our energy systems and our agriculture. So the reason that we have climate change is because emissions from carbon and also emissions from methane from livestock, and also a third cause, which is land use change. So the land that we're turning into using for agriculture for different kinds of crops, deforestation plays a large role in climate change. So if you're trying to think about our energy systems and agriculture, you could also think about technology fixes, right? If you're a scientist, you're like, okay, well, let's just make our energy differently. Let's just make our food differently. And when I was first starting to think about this topic, that's what I was really interested in. It was like, okay, well, maybe we just need better widgets, right? And then you quickly learn that the better widgets kind of exist already. Maybe they can be made better, maybe they could be made more effectively or cheaper, but we do have low carbon sources of energy. We do have low emission sources of food. The food one is particularly easy because it just corresponds to plant-based food, right? You can feed people on plant-based food. Plant-based food is super efficient. You don't need livestock at all. You don't even need to start feeding your cows like special bubble gum so they burp less. You just don't go through the cow, right? But somehow those technological alternatives are not being rolled out. They're not being used at scale. And that becomes very interesting because from an economic perspective, then you're basically saying we don't have a technological problem, we have an economic problem. And so then the question is, what is wrong with our economy that it doesn't allow us to use the technological alternatives we have to hand? And that's where things get really interesting, because if you ask most people, why aren't we using the technology that would allow us to live well and not destroy the planetary systems we depend on, they would say, oh, it just needs to be cheaper. It's too expensive. But that's not true. Lentils have always been cheap. So it's not a question of cost, it's a question of what the market is doing. And when you look at what the market is doing, that's when you start having to use your, I forget which C word I'm on now, probably number 2. You start thinking about capitalism. Because what you understand is that the economy that we have is a capitalist economy, and the way a capitalist economy functions, this is not ideological or political, it's just a fact about the way we need to understand the way our economies function is that we have industries that operate for profit, and these industries use commodities to create profit. That is what they use products for. They make things to exchange for profit. And these industries become tied to their commodities. So when you think of Shell, of Exxon, of BP, of Total, of Saudi Aramco, they are not energy companies. They are fossil fuel companies. Their assets are tied to fossil fuels. Their expertise is tied to fossil fuels. Their corporate culture and everything they've ever done is tied to fossil fuels. They don't see themselves as energy companies. They might have a few units, like a percent or two of their operations doing like batteries and solar panels or whatever. But that is not their job. That is not their core mission. They are industries that become tied to specific technologies. The automotive industry does not see themselves as a transport industry. They see themselves as an automotive industry because that's what their factories do. All their capital assets are tied up. All their advertising culture, everything that they've done in terms of building alliances and marketing is tied up with cars. So these industries within capitalism are not flexible, and they orient the market to serve their purpose. So we have a market where the most powerful players are these large industries that are tied to destructive products or destructive technologies. And that's the problem with capitalism, is that our economy is dominated by these industries. They are the most powerful and the most profitable that have ever roamed the earth. And when we say that we need to stabilize the climate, that we need to reduce emissions, that we need to change consumption, what we're talking about is we're talking about going up against these industries. And I think that we should make no mistake about that. So from an economic and political perspective, the mission of stopping climate breakdown and stopping ecocide becomes very clear. It becomes a mission of dealing with these industries full frontally. And I think that that's possibly the most important thing that we can say in our moment, is not try to step away from that fact. At least that's my perspective. The other thing that that capitalism does, it's a bit frightening, right? But maybe we can do it. Why not? Let's try. So the other thing that capitalism does is it transforms us into products as well. It transforms us into consumers. We were not always consumers. We used to be other stuff. We used to be serfs or something like that, probably. But we were not always consumers. We were always what was convenient to a ruling class or to somebody in power. They always tried to transform us into that image. But that image is currently consumers. And consumerism is a product of capitalism. Capitalism overproduces. It requires growth as a stabilization mechanism. These companies cannot degrow. These companies cannot shrink. They can only grow to survive. So their survival, their growth means our destruction. So our survival means their destruction. It's kind of that simple. But they have turned us into consumers. So they have made our culture a consumer culture. And that's one of the things that I think Extinction Rebellion is also trying to transform. And I think it's really, really important. So that we need to transform, I guess this is the 5th C by now, from consumers away to a different culture. And then the question is, how do we understand how culture is transformed? How do we understand how society is transformed? And how do we go about affecting change, which is probably another C? I've lost track. Now, if we try to understand how these changes came about, and how we came to be on the course we are now, that means looking through history. So we'd already talked about distant prehistory. We already talked about, millions of years ago when we weren't even around. But in the most recent history, in terms of the developments of industrialization, where Manchester plays a starring role, right? We're also talking about a history of exploitation and a history of domination of other people. And Manchester also plays a starring role in the struggle against that exploitation and against that domination, and I'm hoping it can play another starring role again. But we have to realize that we are in a system that creates us as passive consumers in order to enable profits through exploitation. And one of the things we're doing when we're saying we don't want to be consumers anymore, we want to live in a different way, we want to have an alternative kind of economy that does not require destruction or domination or exploitation of other people or of our environment, we're basically turning away from a huge trend in history. And we're basically causing a shift that I would call civilizational. And there's a nice quip which is, the good news about our century is that capitalism is going to end either way, right? Either it's going to end through collapse, or it's going to end because we succeeded in turning it into something else. So the mission, the mission is really to try to make that happen while protecting each other, while protecting the survival of the young people, of the student strikers, of those most vulnerable in our societies, of immigrants who are forced to flee from other places. So we really have a lot of duty of care built into this. And that's, I guess, where I sort of wanted to go and end, probably. Oh no, there was another one. Oh yes, courage and realism. Oh my goodness. So my notes are slightly rain-locked. So in terms of what this means for this struggle and for this moment and for this next chapter in what we can try to do together, I think we have to be realistic. We're going up against immense forces. The science has been known and settled since pretty much before I was born. I'm 45 years old. So we have lost at least half a century of time when the science was known and settled. Some of the people who knew and settled the science really well, you don't need the IPCC. Basically, the IPCC is useless. I just said that. No, we're very important, I'm sure. But one of the things, the people who knew and settled the science were the fossil fuel companies. In 1982, Exxon had a report showing exactly where we would be in terms of CO2 concentrations and temperature rise today. They knew. That's in 1982, that's 40 years ago. They knew exactly where we were going. They've been building their platforms higher than necessary to prepare for storm surges and sea level rise. They knew exactly where this was going. So one of the things we have to be aware of is that we are going up against absolutely ruthless industry. Very powerful, very profitable, controls much of the way we do business and run our lives around here, including making these roads, including parking spaces, including a lot of the way we run our lives. We're going up against them, and they have known this and decided not to care, decided to keep going. So we have to be aware of who we're going up against, and as well on an international level. That's one thing. The second thing I wanted to say is what does this mean in terms of alternative economics, alternative civilization, alternative culture? Alternative civilization and culture and economics, to some extent, you're already demonstrating here. So you are creating this, and this is an extraordinarily important and beautiful moment to be able to see this. And I think one shouldn't be afraid of the scale of the challenge and the largeness of the task. I would say that previous attempts to work on this topic and to be effective on it have failed precisely because they were not ambitious enough, and they did not have enough of a systemic and historic perspective on the real scale of economic change, social change, cultural change required. So I guess that's my final words. And if people want to keep talking, that's great. Would just be the scale of change is immense, and you're doing it. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'd be happy to if there's time, and I'm happy to talk afterwards. So if is that the scale of this task is immense, but it's absolutely worth doing, and that previous attempts to work on this and change things have failed for past decades precisely because they were not ambitious enough. So if people are saying, oh, well, you're crazy because you're asking people not to drive anymore, you're crazy because you're asking people not to fly anymore, you're crazy because you're asking people not to see themselves as consumers. People are consumers. They have infinite wants and desires. I learned that in Econ 101. Well, first of all, Econ 101 is full of completely baseless lies and bullshit. And which is just the fact. That's scientifically true. But secondly, this is necessary. We need to change pretty much a lot of things, everything, not forces. Forces can say, not Waterstones, we can still have music and books and culture and food. It's just going to be other things that are different. And some of the biggest industries will have to disappear, and I think we need to be clear about that. So that was pretty much what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the clarity and the rigour that you bring to your talk. You have to take questions. We only have one mic and we want to keep it dry. So if you have a question, can you come up to the side of the stage? Come onto the stage and I'll hand the mic over.
Hi there, I'm Ben. I often find myself talking online to climate change deniers. What's the basic reply that you would have to your average climate change denier?
What is that?
Climate change denier?
What is the...
What's the basic reply that you would have?
Okay, my basic, I don't reply to climate change deniers because I don't like my time wasted. But if one is going to reply, I think the point is, that's being a little glib. Partly one of the reasons I don't have to do it is because a lot of people have already done it. So if I do reply, I sort of do it as a test, which is, okay, you asked for evidence. Well, because people, scientists and science communicators have been replying to climate change deniers for so long, there are all kinds of resources, online, reports, videos, YouTube channels, that you can send them to and say, okay, here's your science explained so that a third grade child can understand it. What do you think now? And they never change their mind. And that's how you can tell that they're really not invested in any kind of scientific understanding. So what they are invested in is either being contrarian or wasting our time. And what I think is really important is to understand that climate denial has failed on one hand, because you can't really deny climate change is happening anymore. So on one hand, they've failed. Like, it's really hard to hold that position now. On the other hand, they've succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, because the point was never to argue with physics. The point was to delay action. And so what I would do is argue against them at the level of what their goal is, not what their argument is. And their goal is delay. And Alex Steffen in the US has coined the term predatory delay. So this is harmful delay. It's delay that really prevents us from acting in a way that is salutary to the change we want to effect. And I think that one of the things to be aware of is that climate denial discourse has changed now, and now people aren't talking so much about denial of science, they're talking about delaying action. And so, for instance, insisting that we're all consumers and that people want to consume, they just love the taste of fossil fuels in the morning so much that they're never going to get over it, and that the consumer desire is really going to keep us in this. And there are all sorts of other ones. But there are all these discourses of delay coming up. And we're actually working on a paper together. We've been cataloging them. And we're like, oh, there's like going to be 3 or 4. There's like 20. Anyway, so it's a long paper now. But there are all these different discourses of delay that are coming up. And I think you should learn to try to recognize them as such. And to recognize them and not as a legitimate good faith argument, but an argument that is trying to achieve an ultimate goal of preventing action. So you'll never get enough people to go along with this. The technology is too expensive. There's so many of them. Bicycles are less appealing than cars. No, they're not. Anyway, etc. So there will always be these counter arguments. The most important thing is to respond to them at the strategic level of getting action done, rather than trying to respond to the argument directly, I would say. If you ask a question, you get to be dry for 5 seconds.
I was really interested in your talk about the need for cultural change, about how we need to change the way we view things, and I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that.
So this is something that, I think the cultural element is something that I've come to recently, because as a physicist, you're like, machines and stuff and we'll change things, but no. The cultural change is really important, because how we see each other, ourselves, and our role in the world and the role of our work, the role of our participation in society, changes what we think of as possible. Because Extinction Rebellion has decided that a mass popular movement of people coming together in nonviolent civil disobedience was necessary to really have a scale and rate of change at the necessary, that's commensurate with the scale and rate of change of the planet and what we need to be doing to prevent that. That allows a difference in imagination. That allows a difference in what is possible to ask for. If you stop seeing yourself, if you refuse to see yourself as a consumer, nobody can tell you anymore, but your main role in life and how you see yourself is through consumption objects and brands. And because you don't have a big car, then you're a failure. So if you start learning to see yourself differently, if you start seeing yourself as an active agent of change, and I think that that's going to be, if the next civilization succeeds, we're going to be raising activists. We're going to be raising children in school. They're going to learn organizing. They're going to learn facilitation. They're going to learn how to set up like community organizations themselves. They're going to learn all of these different things in order to be active, creative agents of change in the world. And that we can't just be passive consumers anymore. We can't allow large companies to decide what we consume in any way, or how we live our lives in any way. So we have to take a much more active role, and I think that that's probably one of the most important cultural shifts. I think the other thing is we need to understand one of the lies we tell ourselves in economics is that good things come from selfishness. If every actor in the, if you've taken economics, you know this. If every actor in the economy acts as selfishly as possible, you're supposed to maximize social welfare. This is complete and utter bollocks, right? Sorry. But if you see it that way, then you don't want to act to change it. You're like, oh, well, everybody needs to be as selfish as possible because that's how we get good things in the world, right? So if you change the way we work together, if you change the way you see how we work together for the good of each other, then you're going to refuse that point of view. Then you're going to say, no, we can actually organize to work for each other and protect each other and protect our environment and do things completely differently, and selfishness is not the right way to do this. So understanding how we see ourselves and our role with each other and moving away from these economic lies that really protect a certain economic superstructure is really important, I think. If you have a question, you're welcome.
Thank you. You touched a little on animal agriculture and how we could just not use animals. What would you say to people who think that we shouldn't really be talking about animal agriculture? It's almost a circle, a magic circle around that, and how we can continue to use animal products in a calm and efficient way.
I think the magic circle is broken. In scientific terms, it's well broken, right? So there have been many papers, reports, whatever, on the devastating impacts of animal agriculture. Now, I've worked with colleagues I've worked a bit on this topic. I've worked with colleagues who know a lot more about it. It doesn't have to, no doesn't mean zero. Like, you could have animal agriculture, so everybody's always pointing to, like, you know, a few grazing animals where you can't grow anything else. Why not have those? Soil preserving animal agriculture. That is peanuts, nothing at all compared to factory farming. So what we're talking about the abolition of large-scale factory farming of animals, especially because those animals eat feed that is produced from maize and soybeans. The soybeans are grown in various places, including Amazon deforestation. So what we're talking about is not no, but it's a lot less. Now, what you say to people who say you shouldn't be talking about this, the science is talking about this. So I don't know. People say there's a cultural taboo against telling people what to eat or not. Parents tell their kids to eat what to eat all the time. It used to be, I grew up in an age where there were ads still saying tobacco is okay, right? Where cigarette advertisement was still fine. I remember when I had cigarette candies as a child. Did any of you have that stuff, right? Yeah, well, who are we to not give cigarette candies to children, right? No, well, we do this kind of thing all the time. We sort of negotiate what's healthy, what's safe and acceptable for our societies to be doing as industries. Now, the fight against tobacco and the fight against climate change are very similar, partly because the same people have been doing the dirty side of the work in terms of climate denial. They were also fighting on the side of the tobacco industry in their previous jobs, right? And that was something that was exposed by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway in Merchants of Doubt, which I highly recommend. It's a book that you could get at Lovely Waterstones, or you can also watch the documentary. But the point is, no industry is untouchable. All industries are always open for debate. There is such a thing as a social license to operate. If an industry becomes damaging, we have the right to collectively discuss what to do about it. And food shouldn't be a taboo either. I mean, people used to eat stuff, all kinds of things that were different. Norms change, and we can be part of changing those norms. We have to be.
Hi. Leeds City Council's declared a climate emergency, but they're facilitating the expansion of the airport. I'm taking a deputation to the councillors on the 11th of September against the expansion. Do you think there's any safe amount of flying? Because what one of the councillors already said to me is, how can I stop parents who want to take their child on a holiday, for instance, once a year? I think no flying is safe, but what would you say to that? You know.
Hi. Well, that's a very good question. First of all, shame on all these cities that declare climate emergency without doing anything about airport expansion, including Manchester. Although Manchester is already so big, its rate of expansion is smaller, but that's just because it's already so big. So I completely agree. It would be very interesting to talk to your delegation. I have colleagues who've done quite a bit of work on the airport expansion topic in Leeds. So it's something I'm quite interested in as well. Now, what you say, I think there's two things, or two or three levels of argument. But first I'm going to tell a funny story that's sad. I was teaching some young children about climate change, 5-year-olds, and one girl told me, she said, oh yes, we flew to the Maldives because my daddy wanted to show me the coral reefs, to go snorkeling to see the coral reefs before they go extinct. And I was just like, right, so your father flew you across the world contributing to the extinction of animals to show you the animals that were going to be extinct. I guess that's a great holiday. Anyway, so I think the point of the parents want to do something for their children, there can be argued on both sides. I think the other thing is that there's a distributional argument. Wait, this poor plant. Which also needs water, by the way. Maybe we can move it into the rain. There's a distributional argument. There are some people, so something like 15% of people are responsible for 70% of flights. So it's not the family that goes once a year on holiday. So one of the things that Molly Scott Cato has been talking about, the Green Party has been talking about, or other people as well, is a frequent flyer levy. So the point is, people basically, starting from now, have one flight a year, and then you tax the heck, or you just put a quota and say you can't do more than that. So you could say, yes, if you want Leeds to keep operating for a little bit, let it be for that one family who's going on holiday once a year, which would already be a huge change. We're already talking about reducing flights by a factor of two if people only took one flight a year. That's those that fly. What you're saying in terms of no flying is safe, the same could be true about no driving. The same could be said about no gas heating or cooking. So we're talking about a rapid rate of reduction and what's consistent with that. And flying is part of it, but just saying no flights are safe, I would say no driving. You can say that for any level of emission. We're already past planetary boundaries in that sense. So that becomes quite hard to, it's true, but I'm not sure it helps organizing the way down. But let's be in touch, okay? Yeah, please.
How do we break people out of the current economic paradigm so that they are not complicit?
Good question.
I love easy questions when you. Yeah. So. Wait. Do you have any ideas? I think participating in an event like this is really powerful. So if you can bring some friends along and see how much fun you have when you're not going to the shopping mall, maybe if the weather's a bit better. No, but there's something really powerful to giving people a direct experience of being part of something different and being part of something creative. So where you're part of something where you're building something yourself and you yourself are deciding what you want to do, as opposed to being a passive consumer. And once people sort of have an experience of that, it sort of changes things. And so I think that there's part of just experiencing it. The other thing is to ask people whose interests they're serving. And what's really interesting to me is why that's not taught in schools, why we don't teach our children in schools critical thinking where does advertising come from? When you are being manipulated, when your feelings and your emotions are being manipulated so that you desire something, who benefits from that manipulation? And so I think that there's a lot of sort of allowing people to think critically about the system that they're caught in and the role that they want to play in it. Do they want to be the product of that system, or do they want to have a think about it? Is probably quite important. There are probably some really good books. If people are into reading, there's probably a really nice reading list that we could put together. So I would say, for instance, Kate Raworth's Donut Economics is fantastic. I found it extremely non-boring. As an academic person, I read boring stuff all the time. I don't think Kate Raworth could write a boring word if she wanted to. So maybe that's a good starting point. She also has YouTube videos. So I think there are documents out there that can help people. I wish there were probably more accessible ones on YouTube or things like that. Yeah. Thank you. But please help. If anybody has ideas, how do we break people out of the economic system? Definitely let us know. Yeah. Okay. I think I did at the beginning of it. Should I do it again? Yeah. Okay, yeah, so, all right, so I was just asked to give my CV, or who I am and where I'm coming from. So, my name is Julia Steinberger. I'm a professor of ecological economics and social ecology at the University of Leeds, which I want to say is, I don't know which direction it's in, I'm all turned around, sort of that way, maybe, and that way. But I live in Manchester. My background's in physics. I have a PhD in physics, but I do sort of political economy now and try to understand sustainability. My personal research is on what we need to live well, so the levels of energy and resources required to live decent lives, which is super interesting, and the political economy of that, so the role that the economy plays in shaping how much we actually need, as opposed to consumerism. I'm a lead author on the IPCC, which was said, so that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in Working Group 3 on the 6th assessment report, which will come out in 2021, and which is too late, don't wait for it. Do not wait for that report, the other reports are fine. But I do not speak on behalf of the IPCC, right? So no word that I said today can possibly be used to reflect on the IPCC because they speak for themselves in their reports. And if you want to talk to me further, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Please come ask questions, everybody.